Sam Hargrove dragged his silver-gray suitcase across the wooden floor, the wheels scraping lightly as if trying to emphasize the great journey he was about to embark on. He stood at the door, hand on the lock, turning back only to make sure I, Marian Doyle, was watching him leave. But I didn't get up. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, my hand wrapped around a green glazed mug with a chipped rim. Sam always said it looked cheap, old, just like you. But I liked the slightly rough texture against my fingertips. It was like me, scratched, but never broken. The door clicked shut, sharp and final, and in that moment, the house seemed to exhale, lightly, as if all this time it had been holding itself tight, avoiding Sam's heavy footsteps and loud voice. I set the mug down, no trembling, no sense of loss, just one full, deep, releasing breath. Sam thought that by walking out he was teaching me a lesson. He had no idea I had prepared for him years ahead, and every account, every vital document carried one name only, Marian Doyle. A quiet laugh escaped me, not from joy, but because for the first time in years I felt light. If you've ever lived beside someone who thinks they're the center of the whole house, stay with me. Marian's story isn't just one to hear. It's a reminder that you are not alone. And if you enjoy these slices of real life, you can follow the channel to continue the journey with us. When Sam Hargrove first moved in with me, everything was gentle enough that I once believed I might still have someone to share breakfast with in my final years. Back then, Sam was almost a different man. He washed the dishes, swept the porch, even changed light bulbs before I could remind him. I remember those early days, Sam mowing the backyard and saying, "You shouldn't bend too much, it'll hurt your back." I believed it was genuine care. What I didn't know was that some people are only kind while they're still trying to secure a place in your life. Once they feel comfortable enough, their true nature emerges. It starts with small comments, words that, if you react to, they shrug off as just joking. One evening at a neighbor's dinner, when Mrs. Patterson praised me for remembering so many old recipes, Sam laughed and said, "Marian's very forgetful. If she could remember anything for long, I'd be impressed." Everyone chuckled out of politeness. I looked down at my plate, keeping my expression steady. Then came another one. At a charity group meeting. "Let me handle things for her. She gets confused easily." I knew perfectly well I wasn't confused. I'd managed my finances for 40 years, taught both my daughters to be independent, and handled everything within my capability. But Sam repeated it often enough that people began to believe it. And perhaps he believed it too. What Sam didn't know, and never cared to know, was that I had once paid heavily for the mistakes of my youth. My first husband, Daniel, wasn't an evil man, but he was careless. He let bills pile up, borrowed money from friends, and signed papers without looking. After he died of heart disease, it took me nearly 2 years to untangle the mess of documents he left behind. I swore I would never let anyone touch my assets again. So when Sam sneered, calling me scatterbrained, slow, I didn't argue. I simply observed. The wounds that followed weren't loud but sharp enough to wear a person down. You look a few years older in that outfit. Older folks cling to old habits, hard to change them. Stop singing. It sounds like, well, hard to describe. He said those things right inside my house, right in the space I once considered safe. I used to think older people were hurt only by big things, illness, loss, loneliness. But no, small comments being dismissed, those slight shakes of the head, they carry weight too. And perhaps in any home, respect is what keeps everything standing. When it disappears, affection becomes a thin shadow, hollow wherever it falls. I didn't realize this all at once, but each comment, each glance from Sam, each time he spoke to others as if I wasn't standing right there, they piled up into something I could no longer ignore. Those subtle cuts were the beginning of my awakening. The change in me didn't happen overnight. It was like realizing a door you always thought was open had actually been closed for a long time. And one quiet afternoon, I decided to open the bottom drawer of the wooden cabinet and pull out the burgundy notebook I had hidden for years. It wasn't a diary or a book of memories. It was where I kept the plans I once dared not carry out. I opened the first page. My handwriting wasn't pretty, but it was neat. Private account, solely under the name Marian Doyle. I remember the day I opened that account clearly. Sam was watching football, making half-joking comments about how finances should be handled by the man. I smiled, put on my coat, and walked straight to the bank without saying a word. The next page read, bills, transfer all to my own name. I did it step by step, electricity, water, and internet. Sam didn't notice, or if he did, he probably thought I was following his request to handle the trivial stuff. The last line of the page, safe deposit box, store important documents. I remembered the feeling when the bank employee opened the cold steel door and led me into the storage room. Nothing grand, just a few papers, a few things I needed to keep safe. But I felt calmer, as if someone was standing on my side. A week later, I called attorney Nora Whitman. She had helped me sort out documents after Daniel, my first husband, passed away. Nora was a woman in her 60s with a clear voice and eyes that never judged. When I sat across from her desk, Nora asked just one question. Marian, what do you want to do this time? I replied, I want everything that belongs to me to truly belong to me. Nora nodded, opened a folder, and spoke slowly, as if giving me space to breathe with each word. Loving someone doesn't mean signing papers for them. That sentence made my heart dip for a moment. Not from pain, but because it hit exactly the thing I had ignored for too long. We reviewed everything together. The old will, inheritance rights, property, savings accounts, financial access. Nora said, who do you want to exclude? I answered without hesitation. Anyone who doesn't genuinely care about me. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When Nora handed me the documents to sign, my hand trembled a little, not because I feared Sam finding out, but because signing those papers meant admitting that I deserved to make decisions about my own life, something I had forgotten for many years. But then I picked up the pen. Each signature appeared on the white pages, steady and clear. Nora pushed her glasses up her nose, looked at me, and smiled. Sometimes, Marian, silence isn't endurance. It's preparation. I folded the documents, put them in my bag, and walked out of the office with the feeling that no one could take away what belonged to me anymore, not even Sam. Colin showed up just one day after Sam left. No call, no warning, he'd stop by. I was watering a few pots of herbs on the porch when I heard a car pull up, followed by the familiar slam of a door, the kind people make when they think the whole neighborhood should know they've arrived. Colin stepped out with a small bouquet, the kind sold pre-wrapped at the supermarket, the store logo still on the plastic. The sort of flowers someone buys when they suddenly remember they should bring something to seem polite. He smiled widely, but his eyes didn't match the smile. They were sharp, quick, and scanning my porch like he was appraising something. "Aunt Marian," Colin called loudly, as if we were closer than we actually were. "I brought you some flowers. Just coming by to check if you need anything." I wiped my hands on my apron and stood up straight. "Sam's not here," I said before he could ask. "I know," Colin replied immediately, without a hint of awkwardness. "My dad said you two needed some space." He set the bouquet on the porch table and walked straight into my house, even though I hadn't invited him. Colin always had that habit, assuming the right to step into other people's space. I followed behind slowly, waiting to see the real purpose of his visit. Colin didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the living room, turning in a slow circle to look at the ceiling, the windows, and the fireplace, like someone surveying a property. Then he tossed out a light remark. "Aunt Marian, Dad said you two were talking about the future. Have you ever thought about selling the house and moving into assisted living? Those places are convenient, clean, with people to take care of you." I looked at him for a moment, not angry, just slightly amused. "Colin," I said calmly, "you're talking like I'm not standing right here." He let out a quick laugh, the kind used to cover up a careless comment. "I just mean, you know, being alone in a big house like this can be inconvenient. Dad just worries you'll get tired, that you'll struggle." I didn't speak. I simply looked him straight in the eyes. That look was what made him blink. He continued glancing around the kitchen cabinets, the steps, the window frames, too long to be mere curiosity. It was the look of someone trying to estimate the house's value. When Colin walked over to the bookshelf and let his fingers slide across a framed photo of my family, I knew for sure what he and his father had been doing for a long time, imagining what this house would look like without me in it. "Colin," I said, my voice low but clear, "if you're here to offer real help, I appreciate it. But if you're here because you think this house is a burden—" I paused, letting him finish the sentence in his own mind. Colin pressed his lips together. Just a brief moment, but long enough for me to see the truth. Sam didn't leave to reflect. He left to make room for his son. They were aiming for this house, not out of concern, but for its value. I gathered the supermarket bouquet, rolled it up, and dropped it into the trash bin by the sink. Then I walked back into the living room. My only priority now wasn't explaining or arguing. It was keeping what belonged to me. Sam returned on a Saturday afternoon, just when the sunlight was still bright enough to reveal every scratch on his old pickup truck. I was folding towels in the living room when I heard the door swing open hard, followed by the heavy footsteps of a man entering as if he had every right to walk in whenever he pleased. Not only Sam, Colin came in behind him, walking quickly and full of confidence, as if his last visit hadn't given him enough time to inspect everything. "Marian," Sam said, his voice trying to sound warm, "we came by to see if you need anything." I only nodded, then poured tea. I didn't add a word. My silence seemed to make them more comfortable, as if I had accepted their presence. Sam went straight to the kitchen, opening cabinet after cabinet. Colin opened the back door, looked out to the yard, and inspected the fence. The two of them walked around the house like real estate agents surveying a new property. I sat down and placed the teapot in front of me. No interference. I wanted to see how far they intended to go. "The kitchen cabinets are old," Colin called out. Sam chimed in. "The living room should be updated too. A house this big must be tough for you to manage alone." That wasn't a concern. It was the setup for what was coming next, and I guessed right. Sam stepped closer, arms crossed, tilting his head in that way he always did when trying to persuade someone. "Marian," he said, "this house is too big for you. You don't need this much space." I put my teacup down, looked at Sam, then at Colin, who stood at the back doorway, face full of anticipation. I spoke slowly, each word clear. "I've lived here for 40 years, Sam. To me, this house has never been too big. It's only too big for people who don't belong in it." Both of them froze for a few seconds, long enough to understand I wasn't talking about square footage. I was discussing their role in my life. Colin gave an awkward smile and looked away. Sam pressed his lips together like he had just heard something he wasn't prepared to respond to. He tried again. "You know what I mean, Marian. I just want you to live more comfortably." "I am living comfortably," I replied. "Much more comfortably since there's only one person making decisions in this house." Sam inhaled deeply, but didn't argue. Colin clasped his hands behind his back, looking around the living room one more time, but this time without the confidence he had before. I sipped my tea, still seated in the first chair I bought when I moved here 4 decades ago. In that moment, I realized the house had never made me feel small. Only the way they treated me ever made me shrink, and that had ended. After a while, Sam collected himself, made a few polite remarks, and said he would come back to talk later. I didn't walk them to the door. They didn't wait for me. When their truck pulled out of the driveway, I set my teacup down and felt something inside me stand firmer than ever before. Not because I had won an argument, but because, for the first time in years, I told them clearly that I belonged here, and they did not. Sam returned on a gloomy afternoon, the kind of weather that makes people think about arranging the future. I was wiping down the kitchen counter when I heard him walk straight into the house without knocking, just as he always used to. He didn't ask how I was, didn't warm up the conversation. Sam placed a stack of documents on the wooden table, the top page pinned with a hastily written note, just a small formality. I looked at the note for a few seconds before opening the folder. The first few words were all I needed to understand precisely what he wanted. Request for residential ownership modification. Co-ownership. I didn't flip through it quickly. I read slowly. Line by line, section by section, even the notes at the bottom. Not to understand more, but to steady myself. Sam stood a few steps away, arms crossed, trying to look casual, but his eyes never left my face, as if he were waiting to see how I would react. My heart cooled for a beat, not from shock, but because everything I had suspected was now undeniable, but my expression stayed calm. I set the folder down and looked up at Sam. "You want to explain this?" Sam sighed as if he were the one being burdened. "Marian, this is simple. We're old. We need paperwork in place to stay safe. If something happens to either of us, the other person needs rights to handle things. It's responsibility, nothing complicated." I pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed my hands on the table. "Safe for whom, Sam?" He looked at me, patience slipping. "For both of us. Don't make this difficult. I'm just trying to take care of us." I shook my head, my voice soft but precise. "No one is safe signing something they don't understand." Sam emphasized each word. "You understand perfectly. I'm not asking for much." I replied immediately. "Putting your name next to mine on this house is already too much." The kitchen air thickened. Sam stepped closer, lowering his voice, the tone he used whenever he wanted me to soften. "Marian, you're doubting me for no reason. I've lived here for years. I've never done anything to harm you." I looked straight at him. "You haven't done anything because you haven't been allowed to, and I'm not changing that today." Sam straightened up, his expression turning rigid. "What kind of man do you think I am? I just want recognition. I deserve a share of this house." I gathered the documents and slid them gently back toward him. "You deserve what you've built, not what I already had before you walked into my life." A long silence followed, a very long one. Then Sam snatched the folder, turned, and strode toward the door. This time he didn't say goodbye, didn't leave an explanation. The door slammed so hard the frame shook, but unlike the first time, I didn't flinch. I stood there, hand resting on the table, feeling one thing with absolute clarity. He wasn't angry because I refused. He was angry because, for the first time in many years, I said no in a way he couldn't bend back. 3 days after Sam slammed the door behind him, my house returned to the quiet I had always known. I spent the morning wiping cabinets, watering plants, and brewing tea, not thinking much about Sam. He had chosen to get angry rather than talk. I wasn't surprised. By noon, when I opened my laptop to check my bank emails, a bold subject line appeared at the top of my inbox. Grand Horizon Cruises, booking confirmation. I clicked on it. The details appeared clearly, line by line. An 8-day journey. Luxury balcony suite. Departure date in 6 weeks. Total amount, a figure large enough that any responsible person would think twice. Cardholder, Marian Doyle. I leaned back, hands on the armrest. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't angry. I simply saw every puzzle piece falling exactly where it belonged. Sam hadn't asked me a question, hadn't asked for permission, hadn't left a note. To him, using my card was probably as normal as opening my kitchen cabinets without asking. I stood up, poured more hot water into the teapot to steady myself, then sat back down and dialed the customer service number of the cruise line. A soft female voice answered, "Grand Horizon Cruises. How may I assist you today?" "I'd like to cancel a booking," I said, my voice even. "The person who booked it did not have permission to use my card. The card is in my name and I do not consent." The agent checked for a few seconds and then spoke gently. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. I'll cancel it immediately. The amount will be refunded to your account within 5 to 7 days." "Good," I replied. "Thank you." I hung up. No satisfaction, no relief, only correctness. Every action Sam had taken, every request, every time he pushed a boundary a bit farther, all of it led here. Around 5 p.m., I heard a familiar vehicle pull up. Sam walked into the house with a broad smile, holding a stack of blue brochures. He placed them on the table like a surprise gift. "I did something good for us," he said proudly. "Look, a luxury cruise. You'll love it." I didn't touch the papers. I just looked at him. "The cruise is canceled, Sam." He froze. "Canceled? Why would you—" "I canceled it," I said clearly, "because the card is mine, and you had no right to use it." Sam's face shifted, from confused to annoyed, then from annoyed to wary. "I did it for us. You never know how to enjoy anything." "Sam," I said softly, "you booked that trip for yourself. I was just the name on the card you needed." He opened his mouth to argue, but I continued, my tone calm but unyielding. "The cruise is canceled, Sam, just like your place in this house." The room fell silent. Sam stared at me for several long seconds, as if he couldn't believe those words had come from me, but they had, and I didn't take them back. Sam said nothing more. He turned and walked out the door, not slamming it this time. But the silence he left behind was heavier than any loud exit. I stood in the kitchen, one hand resting lightly on the table. No shaking, no regret, just one clear thought. Every thin layer of smoke Sam had used to cover his intentions had vanished, and I had seen everything. After the conversation about the cruise, Sam didn't come back. No messages, no calls, just the familiar disappearance of a man who always used silence as pressure. But this time, the silence carried no weight in the house. It was light, like closing a book you no longer wish to read. The next morning, I carried a medium-sized cardboard box into the living room, where Sam had left some of his belongings. Old shirts, the shoes he always wore but never cleaned, and a few photos he never seemed to honestly care about. I folded everything and placed it neatly into the box. No mixing things up, no irritation, no regret. Each item went in as softly as placing a period at the end of a chapter that no longer belonged. Just one box. Everything Sam had brought into my home over more than 10 years fit tidily into a single box. I set it by the door, next to the lavender pot I had grown for years. If Sam returned, he could take it. If not, the donation truck will come on Wednesday. Either way was fine. I no longer wanted those things in my house. I stepped into the living room and realized the house was as bright as always, but the peace was different today. No heavy footsteps, no grumbling, no complaints about clutter, just the steady ticking of the clock and gentle sunlight on the wooden floor. I stood for a moment, then sat in the armchair where Sam used to watch TV. The seat still held the indentation from his body over the years, but when I sat down, that indentation no longer belonged to him. It fit me. Perhaps because for the first time I sat there without anyone telling me I was in the wrong spot. I rested my hand on the armrest, feeling its firmness and the lightness inside me. This was my house, not our house, not a place Sam could take over simply because I once softened. From that chair, I looked around, the bookshelves I'd arranged, the glass cabinet my mother left me, the half-finished knitted scarf I had abandoned because every time I picked it up, Sam called it busy work. All those small things now seemed to greet me, as if they, too, recognized I had reclaimed my right to live fully in my own home. I thought about the years behind me. People my age don't need much, just respect and to be heard. But Sam never understood that. He thought raising his voice meant care, and forcing things meant responsibility. As for me, after a long time, I finally understood that kindness is the proper foundation of a family. Not everyone who lives with you is a family member, and sharing a roof doesn't mean sharing a life. That afternoon, I brewed a fresh pot of tea, set it on the table, and opened the window to let the breeze in. The house was so peaceful I could hear the leaves rustling outside. I leaned back in the chair, hands on my knees, eyes on the doorway. No sadness, no longing, only one clear feeling. I had just cleaned up the past, and it should have been cleared out a long time ago. Sam returned on a dim afternoon, the kind of weather that makes people think about coming back, even if only to look for a bit of comfort. I was cutting dried leaves in the yard when I heard the familiar sound of his car stopping. When I looked up, I saw Sam standing at the gate, holding a small paper bag. He looked more worn out than before. Wrinkled shirt, messy hair, a face both tired and confused. He lifted the paper bag slightly, forcing a smile. "I bought ginger cookies. The kind you like the old days." I didn't remind him that he never actually liked me eating ginger cookies. He only remembered they were something I used to bake back when the two of us still treated each other decently. Perhaps now he thought bringing them would bring back some old feeling. I put the shears down, brushed the dirt off my hands, and walked toward the porch. "Come in," I said, my voice as neutral as greeting an old acquaintance. Not close, not distant. Sam followed me into the kitchen. He placed the bag on the table, fumbling with the ribbon as if trying to prolong the moment. "Marian," he began, "I know things got a little out of hand." He tried to look at me, then looked back down at the table. "But we've been together a long time. I thought you would understand me." I made 2 cups of tea and set one in front of him. "I do understand, Sam," I said softly. "I just don't choose to stay silent anymore." Sam inhaled deeply, as if preparing for something important. "I'm not perfect," he said. "I've said a lot of wrong things. But you know, I don't have anyone but you." I looked at him. Not angry, not softened, just the truth. "Sam, I never left you, but you never stopped belittling me." His face changed, as if I had touched the most sensitive place. Then the conversation reached its peak, without a raised voice. Sam spoke first, his voice low but clear. "You'll be lonely." I answered, calm, as if I had thought about it for a long time. Better than living with someone who looks down on me. The entire room fell into silence. Not the kind that preludes a fight, nor the kind that carries sadness, just the kind that appears when an ending has become too clear for either person to pretend otherwise. Sam stood up slowly, like a man who had just realized he had come to the wrong place for forgiveness. He lifted the bag of ginger cookies, then put it back down, as if unsure whether he should take it with him or leave it. "Marian," he said one last time, his voice faintly trembling. "Do you really not need me anymore?" I looked straight at him, not avoiding. I need respect, and that has never existed between us. Sam didn't try again. He turned and walked out, but this time without slamming the door, without anger, without a bitter final line. Just a man walking out of a house he had never truly belonged to. When the sound of his car faded beyond the gate, I sat down in my familiar kitchen chair. I felt neither joy nor sadness, just a quietness inside me, like still water after the wind has stopped. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't letting someone go, it's letting them stay. It's realizing they never gave you what you deserved in the first place. 2 days after Sam came back and left again in silence, I opened the front door to get the newspaper and found an envelope lying neatly on the step. No stamp, no postmark, just my name written in large, bold letters leaning slightly to the right, the handwriting of someone I knew well, someone impatient and used to giving orders. Colin. I didn't need to open it to know what would be inside. The way he placed the envelope right in the center of the step showed this wasn't a casual message. It felt more like a reminder that he and his father still had their eyes on this house, just not in a way I welcomed. I brought the envelope into the kitchen, set it on the table, made a hot cup of tea, and sat down. The envelope lay there as if waiting for me to open it. I looked at it for a moment, not curious, just calm. I guessed it would contain two parts, a half-hearted apology and a subtle threat, reminding me that I shouldn't make things difficult. Colin was always the kind of person who mixed those two tones, soft one moment, firm the next, as if he were negotiating the price of old furniture instead of speaking to an older woman. I sipped my tea, thinking about all the times Colin had shown up without asking whether I was busy, the times he opened my cabinets without permission, examining each item as if he were evaluating merchandise. He and his father never saw my home as the place I lived. They saw it as an asset just out of their reach. I set my teacup down, lifted my head, and looked at the envelope again. Then I stood up, opened the wooden cabinet beside the kitchen, and took out the minor key that unlocked the safe deposit box stored in the bottom drawer. This was where I kept essential documents, and also things that weren't important but needed to be preserved for personal reasons. I opened the box, placed Colin's envelope inside, unopened, unmarked, unread, closed the box, put the key away. No drama, no heroic effort, just a simple choice. I would no longer let their words, whether apologies or threats, enter my life ever again. And quietly, I spoke a single sentence to myself, soft but firm, as if engraving it into my mind. Not every message deserves to be read. That afternoon, while sweeping the porch, I saw Colin's car drive slowly past the house. He looked in, as if checking for my reaction, but I simply bent down to gather dried leaves. He would never know what I had done with the letter, and he didn't need to. Some things don't need explanations, don't need conclusions. They just need to be set down and walked past. I closed the porch door, locked it softly, and went inside. The house was quiet, orderly, bright and roomy, holding only the things that belonged to me. That day, I understood something more. When you stop lending your ears, the noise has nowhere left to enter, and sometimes silence is the most complete answer of all. On a Sunday morning, while I was cutting fruit for lunch, I heard a car stop at the gate. I looked out the window and saw Lily, my niece, stepping out of the car with her familiar smile. She was holding a bag of warm baked goods and a bright bouquet of orange chrysanthemums. "Aunt Marian," she called, her voice as sunny as the way she walked into the house. "I brought pastries and flowers in exchange for lunch with you." I smiled and opened the door wider. "Just you coming is enough." Lily put the flowers in a vase, arranged the pastries on a plate, and sat at the table as if this place had always been hers. The kitchen suddenly felt brighter, as if the house had heard laughter from a child for the first time in a long while. We had a simple lunch, lightly seasoned noodles, a small salad, and the pastries Lily brought. Midway through the meal, I looked at Lily and realized it had been a long time since I felt the warmth of sitting with someone who truly cared about me. Someone who didn't calculate gains, inspect every possession, or say things that made me feel small. Just a meal, but my throat tightened a little. Lily put down her fork, looked at me for a long moment, and then said softly, "You didn't abandon anyone, Auntie, you know?" I looked up. "You just came back to yourself." Simple words, but they struck the place where I still carried a slight unease. I had thought that letting Sam go might make me a cold person, but Lily didn't see it that way, and I knew she was sincere. We washed the dishes together. Lily wiped the table while I adjusted the orange chrysanthemums in the vase until they looked just right. When she was ready to leave, Lily took a pale blue flyer from her bag. "Look at this, Auntie," she said. "The senior center in town is hosting some life experience sharing sessions. Gentle, like coffee chats. They're looking for speakers on 3 topics: self-respect, financial independence, and the strength of older adults. She looked at me meaningfully. I think you'd be perfect. I took the flyer and read it. Something inside me slowly opened, not because I wanted to recount my suffering, but because maybe what I'd been through could help someone else realize their worth sooner than I did. You should try it, Lily added. You don't have to tell specifics. Just say that older people also have the right to decide their own lives. I folded the flyer and held it for a moment. All right, I said. I'll participate. Lily hugged me before she got in the car. You're stronger than people think, she said. I'm proud of you. After her car pulled away from the gate, I carried the vase of chrysanthemums into the living room. The bright orange made the room feel young again. I sat in my armchair, my chair, and opened the burgundy notebook. I wrote on a new page, it's time to share what I've learned. Respect begins with oneself. Financial independence is the lifeline of older adults, and we, those who have passed the halfway point, are not weak, not faded, not redundant. We have a voice. The house was quiet but no longer empty. It was full because I had returned to myself. Sam's letter arrived on a clear afternoon just after I had finished sweeping the porch. The postal worker handed the envelope to me and said it had been sent from the next town. I took the envelope, feeling slightly strange because Sam wasn't a man who wrote letters. The handwriting on the envelope was his, slightly slanted with heavier and lighter strokes, like a hand that trembled but tried to appear steady. No subject, no message on the outside, just my name. I brought the envelope inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. I wasn't anxious. I wanted to read it with as much clarity as I could. The letter was nearly 2 pages long. Each line looked like it had been written during a sleepless night. Marian, I'm no longer sure whether I'm right or wrong. Sometimes I think you're too strict. Other times I know I crossed the line. I'm sorry if I made you tired. You know me. I'm not used to living alone. My house is now full of your son's married quarrels. I don't fit here. I miss your home. I miss the way you make tea. I don't know what I expected. Just in case things ever calm down, I hope we can talk like we used to. If not, then that's it. Sam. When I finished reading, I set the letter down and rested my hand on the table for a long time. The letter wasn't bad, but it wasn't enough. It was the kind of note that apologizes halfway, then places blame halfway, then tries to summon shared memories to hold on. Not malicious, but not entirely sincere. I wasn't angry, not sad, just the feeling of closing a drawer that had been left open for too long. I stood up, took the letter, and went to the bedroom, where I keep a small wooden cabinet with drawers for different purposes. I opened the last drawer and placed the letter inside. Not the drawer for valuables, not the one for things to remember, just the drawer for things that have ended. I said softly, to affirm it to myself, a place for what is finished. I closed the drawer. The sound was gentle and clean, like the ending of a road that no longer echoes. There was no hatred in me, no desire for revenge, no intention of reopening old conversations. I simply felt peace. The peace that comes from letting go at the right time, with the right person, in the right way. That evening, I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the porch. Nothing in the view changed. The pots were still green, the yard was still clean, the wind still blew gently. But inside me, everything had settled. I no longer waited for Sam's car, no longer wondered what he was thinking, no longer held any thread tying me to those weary days. I had closed that door, not angry, not sad, not expectant, simply stepping away from it. That morning, I woke earlier than usual, not from sleeplessness, but from a lightness inside that's hard to describe. I went downstairs, made a mild cup of tea, and walked down the hall to the living room. The new linen curtain at the window still held a soft crease from yesterday. I pulled it aside. Sunlight poured in at once, a gentle gold, both bright and warm. falling across the wooden floor and flowing into every small corner of the house. The house suddenly felt larger, airier, as if it too had just exhaled after years of being held in. I stood and felt clearly that this place belonged to me now, no longer shaded by anyone's voice or shadow. I carried my tea to the small table by the window, opened the burgundy notebook, the one where I had recorded each step of reclaiming my life. The previous pages were filled with notes about the lawyer, accounts, and the moments when I discovered I was stronger than I thought. I turned to the last blank page. My hand didn't shake like when I signed papers with Nora, nor did it feel heavy like when I put Sam's final letter away. This time, my hand was steady, as if placing a full stop at the end of a completed sentence. I wrote one clear, legible line. I didn't survive. I began again. When I finished, I put the pen down, closed the notebook, and held it close as a reminder that I had gone through it all by my own strength. The house was silent, but not the silence of absence. It was the peace of a place returned to its proper owner. I looked out the window. A neighbor was watering flowers and birds gathered on the power line. The wind made the branches sway. Everything was ordinary, but ordinary in a way that soothed my heart. I no longer waited for anyone to come through the door, no longer feared anyone would knock, and no longer had to make myself small for anyone's comfort. I took a sip of tea and thought that many people might be like me, quietly living in their own homes, wondering if they have the right to change. And if they hear this story, I hope they'll see that it's never too late to stand up. I opened the window to let the morning breeze in and whispered, as if sending a blessing to anyone listening somewhere, "Peace is something everyone deserves." If Marian's story inspires you to feel a little stronger, please consider sharing or following our channel. Here, we keep real-life stories, so everyone knows that no matter how long the detour, peace always has a place to return to.